The airport fell silent as Chibuike tore his wife's passport into pieces, his mother laughing beside him. "Your father's surgery can wait," he sneered. Ngozi never reached for the torn pages. She was watching an elderly man in a wheelchair being rushed toward the gate. The moment he saw her, everything around them changed. Nobody standing in that terminal understood what they were witnessing. To them, it looked like an ordinary embarrassment. A husband losing his patience, a wife too proud to beg. Strangers slowed their steps to watch, the way people do when cruelty happens in public and curiosity beats manners. Chibuike stood tall in his tailored jacket, torn paper falling from his fingers like confetti at the wrong kind of celebration. Beside him, his mother, Mama Beatrice, folded her arms and smiled the smile of a woman who believed she was watching justice, not humiliation. And a few steps back, close enough to matter, stood Folasade, a woman from Chibuike's bank who had spent the last year convincing herself she deserved his life more than the woman standing in front of him. Ngozi did not move. She looked down at the torn pieces scattered near her shoes, then lifted her eyes, calm and unreadable, toward the gate behind them, where something was happening that none of them had noticed yet. An elderly man in a wheelchair was being rushed through the crowd, flanked by men who moved like they were paid to protect something valuable. Watch closely, because in the next few minutes, everything this family believed about the woman they had just humiliated was about to fall apart. "You heard me," Chibuike said, louder now, aware that people were watching and unable to stop himself from performing for them. "Your father's surgery has waited this long. It can wait a little more. We are not paying for another one of your emergency trips." Ngozi said nothing. She did not cry. She had learned, somewhere over the last 6 years, that tears were currency she refused to spend on people who didn't deserve to see them. He had no idea the woman he had just humiliated in front of strangers could have bought the airline they were standing inside of, twice over, and still had money left to build another one. If this story is already breaking something in your chest, stay with us, because it only gets heavier from here. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. This is a story about a woman the world underestimated her whole life, and a man who was about to learn what silence can cost. 3 years before that airport, Ngozi lived in a house with marble floors and staff who called her our young madam. Her father, Chief Obafemi Oyelaran, built an industrial empire that touched steel, shipping, and real estate across 2 continents. A man whose name alone could open doors that stayed shut for everyone else. He loved his daughter the way powerful men often do. Fiercely, but with conditions attached to that fierceness, believing that protecting her meant deciding her future for her. At 22, she was told she would marry a man from another wealthy family, a merger disguised as a wedding. She had met him twice. He spoke to her the way men speak to property they already own. When she tried to explain to her father that she wanted a life chosen by her own hands, he told her that love was a luxury poor people could afford to prioritize, and she was not poor. She left 3 days before the engagement was to be announced. She packed 1 bag and walked out of a house with 14 rooms, carrying nothing from that world except a wristwatch her father had given her on her 18th birthday. The only gift of his she had ever felt was given out of love rather than obligation. The clasp cracked the night she climbed over the back gate to avoid the driver stationed at the front. She never had it fixed. She wore it anyway, hidden under long sleeves. A small, quiet reminder of the moment she chose herself over everything she had been given. She built a new life from nothing, taking a modest job as an accounts clerk under a name close enough to her own that old friends wouldn't easily trace her, far enough that new ones never would. She met Chibuike 2 years later, a junior officer at a mid-sized bank with ambition sharp enough to cut. He was charming in the beginning, attentive in ways that felt like safety after years of being managed rather than loved. She told him her family situation was complicated and that she preferred not discussing it. He respected that boundary at first. Respect, like most things with Chibuike, had a shelf life. By their second year of marriage, his ambition had hardened into something else, an appetite that needed constant proof it was being fed. He began comparing her, quietly at first, to the wives of senior colleagues, women with visible wealth, degrees from abroad, confidence built on things you could see. Ngozi's calm, once the thing that drew him to her, slowly became, in his eyes, evidence of a woman with nothing worth showing off. "You have no ambition," he told her one night, after a dinner party where she said little and listened much. She only looked at him, the way she always did when his words tried to make her small. She did not cry. She had learned that peace does not require anyone's permission to exist, even inside a house that had stopped feeling like a home. What none of them knew, not Chibuike, not his mother, not the woman circling their marriage like a bird waiting for a branch to break, was that the woman they dismissed as ordinary had walked away from more money than their entire family had seen across 3 generations, and she had done it on purpose, because she had learned the hard way what money does to the people who chase it. By the 3rd year, cracks that had been quiet started making noise. Chibuike began staying late at the bank, his phone always face down on tables, its screen lighting up at hours that meant nothing good. Folasad, a senior relationship manager 2 ranks above him, had noticed something in Chibuike that most people missed, a hunger for validation dressed up as ambition. She fed that hunger carefully, telling him things his wife never did, that he was destined for more, that men who worked as hard as he did deserved partners who understood the game, not women who hid in the background. Folasad's motive wasn't simple greed, though greed played its part. She had spent 15 years watching men rise past her at the bank while she trained them, carried their mistakes quietly, and received none of the credit. She had convinced herself that attaching herself to a rising star like Chibuike wasn't manipulation. It was correction, a way of finally getting what years of overlooked labor should have earned her. She told herself she deserved this. People rarely admit, even to themselves, when ambition has curdled into something uglier. Mama Beatrice, for her part, believed she was protecting her son. She had raised Chibuike alone after his father left, and she measured love in visible sacrifice and visible reward. A daughter-in-law who brought nothing tangible to the family, no dowry worth speaking of, no family name to leverage, no children yet after 3 years, registered to her as a failure she refused to let her son suffer quietly. "A man like you needs a wife who can stand beside you, not behind you," she told Chibuike one Sunday afternoon, right in front of Ngozi, as if she weren't in the room at all. "That girl has given you nothing, no child, no name we can even speak of at family functions." Ngozi set the tea tray down without a word and left the room. She did not cry. But that night, alone, she took out her father's wristwatch, held it in her palm, and let herself remember, for just a moment, what it felt like to be protected instead of measured. The betrayal deepened in ways she could see, and ways she couldn't yet. Chibuike began mentioning Folasad's name with a familiarity that had nothing to do with work. He came home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't Ngozi's. He grew short-tempered over small things, a delayed dinner, a quiet evening, anything that gave him space to think about the comparison Folasade had planted in his mind between the wife he had and the life he believed he deserved. And then the call came. It was a Tuesday afternoon when her phone rang with a number she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Obinna, her father's longtime assistant, his voice cracking as he spoke. "Madam, your father collapsed 4 days ago. His heart. The doctors say surgery cannot wait much longer. He is asking for you. Only you." She stood in her kitchen, holding the phone, and for the first time since she left that house at 22, tears rose in her that had nothing to do with Chibuike or his family at all. She did not let them fall yet. There was too much to arrange, and grief, she had learned long ago, could wait its turn. She told Chibuike that night, expecting nothing, and receiving exactly that. He barely looked up from his phone. "Your father," he repeated flatly. "The one you never talk about. The one you've claimed for 3 years has nothing to do with you." He laughed, short and cold, the kind of laugh that comes from a man who has decided, somewhere along the way, that his wife's private pain is evidence against her rather than something worth understanding. Convenient timing, don't you think? Right when there are rumors about money at the bank. She hadn't heard the rumors yet, whispers Folasade had quietly planted among Chibuike's colleagues, suggesting Ngozi came from money she was hiding, money that made Chibuike look foolish for working so hard while his wife sat on some secret fortune. It was a lie built to look like truth, designed to turn his insecurity into anger he could aim somewhere. She said nothing in her own defense. She booked the flight herself that night, packed one small bag, and asked only for peace on the way to the airport. Instead, she received an audience. Because Chibuike, humiliated by whispers he half believed and half resented, decided that morning he would teach his wife a lesson about who controlled their household. He brought his mother for support. He brought Folasade too, introducing her at the check-in counter as someone from the bank helping with logistics, though anyone watching could see there was nothing professional in the way she stood close enough to touch his arm. At the counter, in front of a growing crowd, Chibuike reached across and took the passport from Ngozi's hand before the airline attendant could scan it. "You are not getting on this flight to go running toward people who abandoned you the moment life got complicated," he said, loud enough that heads turned throughout the terminal. "This whole story about your father, it's an excuse. You've never even shown me a photograph of this man in 3 years of marriage." Before she could answer, he tore the passport in half, then in half again. The pieces fell between them, and for a moment the entire gate area went quiet with the particular silence that follows public cruelty. The silence of strangers deciding whether to intervene or simply watch. Mama Beatrice laughed, a short, satisfied sound. Folasade looked away, smiling faintly, already imagining a future where this woman no longer existed in it. Ngozi stood still. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked past all three of them, toward the gate, where a commotion had begun. Airport staff moving with unusual urgency, a wheelchair being pushed through the crowd at a pace reserved for people whose comfort mattered to someone very powerful. An elderly man sat in that wheelchair, an oxygen tube resting beneath his nose, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who cleared a path like they had done this 100 times before. He was thinner than she remembered, his face pale with the particular exhaustion of a body fighting itself, but his eyes, sharp, unmistakable, the same eyes she saw in the mirror every morning, found her from 30 feet away, and held on. He had defied his own doctors to make this trip, refusing surgery until he had seen his daughter one final time, unwilling to let a decade of silence be the last word between them if his heart gave out on the table. Chibuike had no idea what that torn passport was about to cost him. He had no idea whose gaze had just settled on him from across that terminal, or what that gaze would mean for the rest of his life. "Papa," Ngozi whispered, the word breaking something loose in her chest that 6 years of composure had held carefully in place. Chibuike turned to see who she was speaking to, confusion crossing his face, the torn passport still clutched in his hand like a small, meaningless trophy. The old man's assistant stepped forward first, speaking urgently to an airport official, who went visibly pale before immediately reaching for a radio. Word moved through the terminal staff the way electricity moves through wire, not gossip, but the fast, disciplined recognition of people realizing exactly whose presence they were standing inside of. "Sir," the official said, hurrying toward the group, breathless. "Chief Oyalaran, please, your daughter's documentation. We will resolve this immediately, right this way. Please." Oyalaran. The name landed on Chibuike like something cold poured slowly down his spine. He knew that name. Everyone at his bank knew that name. Chief Obafemi Oyalaran, the reclusive industrialist whose companies quietly touched half the infrastructure projects across the region. A man so private that most junior staff assumed the name belonged only to boardroom memos, not a living person who might, one day, be standing 20 feet away from them at an airport gate. "Papa," Ngozi said again, kneeling beside the wheelchair, taking his frail hand in both of hers, careful of the tubes and wires connecting him to a small portable monitor one of his men carried. "You shouldn't have come. Your heart can't take this kind of stress." "My heart," Chief Oyalaran said, his voice weak but carrying the same authority it always had, "has been aching for 11 years, wondering if I would ever see you again. A little more risk today changes nothing that matters." He looked past her shoulder at Chibuike, at the torn passport still in his hand, and something in his expression shifted from love to a quiet, devastating disappointment that needed no raised voice to land. "This is your husband?" Ngozi didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. The scattered pieces of paper on the floor answered for her. Chief Oyalaran studied Chibuike for a long, unbearable moment, long enough for the younger man to feel, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely and completely small. "Do you know," the old man said slowly, each word deliberate, "what my daughter walked away from to build a life on her own terms, a fortune most men spend their entire careers chasing. And she chose instead a quiet life, asking nothing from anyone, until the man she married decided to tear up her identity in an airport because he could not be bothered to ask who her father was. The crowd that had gathered moments earlier to witness a domestic humiliation now stood witnessing something else entirely. Phones that had been filming Ngozi's embarrassment slowly turned toward the old man instead, sensing, correctly, that the real story had only just begun. "I don't understand," Chibuike said, his voice cracking slightly, the confidence that had carried him through the last 10 minutes draining visibly from his face. "You said—" He turned to Ngozi, desperate now. "You told me your family had nothing to do with you anymore. You told me there was no money." "I never lied to you," Ngozi said quietly, standing now, her father's hand still in hers. "I told you I chose not to touch it. There is a difference, Chibuike. You simply never cared enough to ask what that difference meant, because the answer you assumed already suited you fine. Folasad, standing a few feet back, had gone completely silent, her face draining of color as she recalculated in real time exactly how much she had gambled on the wrong woman being the fool in this marriage. Whatever future she had imagined for herself beside Chibuike evaporated the instant she understood there was no hidden fortune to inherit through him, only a man whose career was about to be shadowed by a scandal she herself had helped ignite. Mama Beatrice's laughter had long since disappeared. She stood frozen, staring at the wheelchair, at the two men in suits, at the airport officials now bowing slightly as they cleared a private lounge for the family. And she understood, in that instant, that everything she believed she knew about her son's marriage had been built on a foundation she never once bothered to check. Chief Oyalaran turned to the officials. "Get my daughter a new passport today. Whatever it costs, whatever needs to be expedited, I will cover it myself." Then, more quietly, to Ngozi, "Come home with me. Let's go see the doctors together, the way we should have all along." She rose to her feet, still holding her father's hand, and looked at Chibuike one final time. "You spent 3 years asking why I never wanted more from you," she said, her voice steady, almost gentle. "I didn't want more because I had already seen what more does to people. I watched money turn my own father into a man who tried to choose my life for me. I thought loving you quietly would protect us both from that same trap. I was wrong. It only protected you from ever having to earn me." She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She simply turned and walked beside her father's wheelchair toward the private lounge, leaving Chibuike standing among torn pieces of paper that had just cost him far more than he could yet understand. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who never bothered to ask who you really were, you already know exactly what this moment feels like. Stay with me, because what happens next, none of them saw coming. The fall came quickly after that, the way it usually does once a secret this large stops being a secret. Within days, word had spread through Chibuike's bank that his estranged father-in-law was Chief Obafemi Oyalaran, and that the marriage was, by every account that mattered, finished. His colleagues, who had once quietly pitied him for his plain, humble wife, now regarded him with a different curiosity entirely, the kind reserved for men who threw away a fortune out of pure carelessness. His branch manager, worried about the bank's reputation should any part of the airport incident circulate further, quietly moved him off 2 accounts he had spent years building, citing restructuring that fooled no one. Folasade distanced herself almost overnight. Whatever she had imagined for her future beside Chibuike dissolved the moment she understood there was no wealth to access through him, only a man now carrying a scandal that made him a liability rather than an opportunity. She stopped answering his calls within a month, then blocked his number entirely when he grew persistent. She had never wanted Chibuike for himself. She had wanted what she believed came attached to him, and when that possibility disappeared, so did she. Mama Beatrice tried, in her own way, to reach out to Ngozi. A phone call here, a message there, each one beginning with some version of, "We didn't know. We never would have treated you that way if we had understood who your family was." Ngozi read every message. She answered none of them, not out of cruelty, but because she finally understood something she hadn't fully accepted before. Their kindness had always come with conditions, waiting patiently on a name they had never once bothered to ask her for. Chibuike, for his part, tried exactly once to see her again. He flew to Geneva 2 months later, stood outside the private clinic where her father was recovering, and waited nearly an hour before a member of the household staff finally allowed him a few minutes in the hallway. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice smaller than she had ever heard it. "I let my pride get in the way of who you actually are." Ngozi looked at him with something closer to sadness than anger. "You didn't make a mistake about who I am," she said. "You made a mistake about what mattered to you. You spent years measuring me against women with louder names and more visible confidence, and the whole time, you were married to a woman who could have given you a life beyond anything you can imagine, if you had simply chosen to love her without needing to know the price first." "Can we fix this?" he asked, and there was something almost genuine in the question. A man finally seeing clearly what he had lost, even if the seeing came far too late to matter. "Some things don't need fixing," she said quietly. "They need to be released." She turned and walked back into her father's recovery room, and that was the last conversation they ever had. The divorce that followed was quiet, without spectacle, without lawyers fighting publicly over headlines the way lesser stories often become. Ngozi asked for nothing from him. No property, no settlement, nothing carrying his name attached to it. She wanted only the one thing she had come for in the first place: her father, alive, and whatever time remained for them to repair 11 years of silence. Chief Oyalaran's recovery took months, slow and careful, and in that time, father and daughter finally did what they had never allowed themselves to do across more than a decade apart. They simply talked. About the marriage he had once tried to arrange for her without asking what she wanted. About her fear that love only ever arrived wrapped in obligation. A lesson she had learned watching how power reshaped the people closest to her father. About the cracked wristwatch, which she finally showed him one evening, the clasp still broken from the night she climbed over a back gate to escape a life chosen for her rather than by her. He wept when he saw it. An old man who had spent his fortune building an empire and had somehow never understood until that moment that the only thing his daughter had ever truly wanted from him was permission to choose her own life. "I should have fixed that watch myself," he told her, holding it gently in his hands. "Instead, I let you carry it broken for 11 years because I was too proud to reach out first." "It doesn't need fixing anymore," she told him, taking it back gently. "It just needed you to see it." With her father's blessing and with savings, she had quietly built herself over the years through careful, independent investments Chibuike never knew existed, choosing to grow something small and hers rather than depend on the life he offered. Ngozi started a foundation the following spring. It offered scholarships and startup grants to young women from ordinary backgrounds. Women who, like her once, had learned to make themselves smaller than their worth so that no one would question them, or worse, want them for the wrong reasons entirely. She named it after the 11 years she had spent building an ordinary life on purpose, a name only she and her father truly understood. She kept one object from the wreckage of her old marriage, not the torn passport, which the airline quietly replaced within hours and which she forgot entirely within days, but her father's wristwatch, repaired now by a careful jeweler in Geneva, its clasp finally whole after 11 years. It sat on the desk of her new office, no longer a wound she hid beneath long sleeves, but proof of exactly what she had survived and exactly who she had chosen to become on her own terms. Chibuike, from a distance he could never quite close again, watched her name begin appearing in business circles, not as anyone's wife, not even as anyone's daughter, but simply as her own name, standing entirely on its own. He understood, finally, and far too late, that the woman he had torn a passport in front of at that airport had never been small at all. He had simply never taken the time to look closely enough to see her. If there is one thing I want you to carry with you from this story tonight, let it be this: never measure someone's worth by how loudly they announce it. The quietest people in any room are often carrying the heaviest truths, the deepest histories, the most unshakable strength. And one day, without warning, without needing to raise their voice even once, the truth always finds its moment to stand up and speak for itself. She did not cry, not because she felt nothing, but because she had already learned, long before that airport, that peace does not need permission to survive even the cruelest storm. If this story moved something in you tonight, hit like, subscribe if you're new here, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Which moment hit you hardest? The torn passport falling to the floor, or the wheelchair rolling quietly through that crowd, carrying a truth none of them saw coming? Stay with me, because there are many more stories like this one still waiting for you. And I promise you, the next one hits just as hard.